The assault on the U.S. Capitol has sparked major security concerns, especially when it comes to police responses and domestic terrorism. Pro-Trump rioters stormed the Capitol building, shattered windows, and rampaged through the halls yesterday. Video shows police failing to repel and disperse the crowds. Some images even show some officers posing for pictures with protesters and helping demonstrators walk downstairs safely. So we want to bring in CBS News senior security contributor Michael Morell. He's also the former acting director of the CIA, and he is joining us on the phone. So listen, Mr. Morell, thank you so much. I'm really going to value your insight here, because I know that the images that we were watching yesterday at best made it look like the law enforcement there were understaffed, unprepared, and in some cases unwilling to do what's necessary to keep the protesters out. I know it's complicated when it comes to securing the Capitol, but we're talking about, Capitol Police, the National Guard, FBI. Were they unprepared for what happened yesterday?
Anne Marie, I think it's safe to say that what we saw yesterday was a total failure of security. You talked about being unprepared, and that's exactly right. They should have known that those protesters would show up at the Capitol, and they should have been prepared for that with hundreds of officers borrowing from the D.C. police, borrowing from the Park Police. There should have been hundreds of officers ringing the Capitol so that they could not have gotten through to the building. So that's issue number one, is the failure to prepare, the failure to foresee what was going to happen. The second failure was as it was playing out, and you mentioned it, right? We saw Capitol Police helping the protesters, helping them get into the building, helping them get out of the building, taking the selfies, right? We saw Capitol Police who were siding with the protesters. So again, total security failure. There needs to be a major investigation of this. People need to be held accountable, both at the senior levels for not being prepared and at the working levels for not doing their job.
Mike, let me ask you about, so the points that you're making, I think, are extremely important. And Fran Townsend, who I know you know very well, who's a former national security advisor to President George W. Bush, was on our air this morning, on CBS this morning, and she equated what we saw yesterday to the actions that we had seen in the past, specifically as it comes when it comes to Black Lives Matter, the protest over the summer. Very, very different reaction. And Fran said that if these protesters were African American or Black and Muslim, that we would have seen a very, very different response from law enforcement. And Fran went on to say that we should be ashamed of the way that the police handled the situation yesterday, vis-a-vis what we saw over the summer, when we know that tear gas was launched just so that the president could make a walk over to a church to hold a Bible upside down. Do you agree with Fran?
I agree with her 100%, right? And to me, it's a simple reflection of the systemic racism that still exists in our society and that we need to get rid of. There is no doubt in my mind that if those were Black Lives Matter protesters yesterday breaking into the Capitol building, there would be dozens and dozens of people dead today.
We certainly saw Confederate flags being waved. We also know that there were many QAnon conspiracy theory followers within this crowd. Now, the FBI considers this group a domestic terrorism threat. QAnon is this sort of weird thing because it's a collection of conspiracy theories that pop up on the internet. Finding a source or a leader or an organizer, that doesn't really work when it comes to QAnon. But I want to just get your take on, what can you tell us about the impact of this group, for lack of a better phrase, because I really don't know what to call QAnon, and the role that it plays in this type of escalation that we saw in the Capitol?
Yeah, I'll say two things, Anne-Marie. One is that on the question of terrorism, the definition of terrorism is violence to make a political point, violence for a political end. That is exactly what we saw yesterday. So we should be calling what happened yesterday terrorism, domestic terrorism. And that brings me to my second point, right? There are many people that I talk to in the intelligence community and in the law enforcement community at the FBI level who now believe that domestic terrorism is a greater danger to our country than international terrorism. Not that we don't need to worry about international terrorism, but just that domestic terrorism is growing in severity at a very rapid rate. And, we saw that play out yesterday.
It's such an important point, Mike. It's a discussion that a lot of us in the media have been having about what to call what we witnessed yesterday. The former president of the United States called it an insurrection, and now you are, just based on the definition that federal law enforcement has for terrorism, calling it a domestic act of terror. Michael, thank you so much as always. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.